Hey, everyone. Happy Friday. I'm so excited to come on to share with you today. I'm Natasha of Lovely You blog here, as always, to inspire you to do life better. And today, again, just super excited to bring another week of my Doing Life Better series, where I have been bringing on experts in their field to just share some insight with you, some tips and ways on how to do life better during this season. And so today I'm so super excited to have Lauren Hyatt with us. Say hi to Lauren. Give us a hello in the comments or a high five, a wave in the comments. Just to let us know that you're here or to let us know that you stopped by. I also want to give a shout out to those who may be watching on the replay. So hello to you guys when you see it. So I just want to again thank everyone for joining us today. And so this month is actually National Adoption Month. And so I'm so super excited to have Lauren with us today to share with us on adoption. And so I wanted to share a little bit of her bio with you all. If you didn't get a chance to see the post that I had posted previously, Lauren Hyatt is a Jesus follower. Go Jesus. Yes. A wife of 9 years, mama to her two beautiful daughters through adoption, do-it-yourselfer, aspiring blogger, clean living enthusiast, and currently works as a digital marketing manager for a local adoption agency here in North Carolina. Adoption has always been her heart, but her battle with infertility, which she'll kind of talk about in a few minutes and share her story with you all. So I'm just going to jump right into it because that's basically a little bit of your bio, but you're going to share with us. So I'm kind of excited to get into this. So now I'm just going to give Lauren some time to kind of share with us her adoption journey and her adoption story.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Natasha. I'm glad to be here. So I guess just to start out with, my husband and I, like Natasha said, we've been married for 9 years. And after a couple of years of being married, we decided we wanted to start our family. And so after trying without any success to get pregnant for a couple of years, we decided, you know what, instead of pursuing fertility treatments, we had talked about adoption before we ever even were married. We talked about it while we were dating and said it was both on our hearts. And, we sort of thought that it would probably happen where we'd have biological children and then we would adopt. But we just felt like the Lord was leading us instead of pursuing, IVF or something like that, that we wanted to adopt. And so we started the research phase, which is super overwhelming when you try to go to Google and you're like, is it international or foster or domestic adoption and trying to find an agency. And it was very overwhelming for anyone who has been through that process. I'm sure you can attest to that. And so I was actually talking to our pastor, and he had mentioned that his brother-in-law was the president of an adoption agency, which I didn't know that. And so I went online after our conversation and searched the agency, and I found on their website that they were having an informational meeting like less than an hour away from our house the very next week. And so I felt like, okay, this is God's sign, that this is something we should pursue. And so we went to the meeting and just felt really at peace about it. And I think for us, when we looked at the agency, something that spoke to us was just not only the ministry that they had for the children, but the ministry they had for the birth moms. And so one of the stats that they had shared at their informational meeting was that I think it was 7 of the women who had placed their children with the agency the year prior had given their lives to Christ. And so for me, that was something that I think we just looked at that and said, wow, like that is an amazing ministry that they have. And to be part of that would be something that, we feel like God has called us to. And so originally going into the meeting, we thought we'd probably do international adoption. But after hearing about their domestic program and the way that they really loved on the expectant moms, my husband and I looked at each other when we had the breakout of like, okay, are we going to do international or domestic? And we both were like domestic. And so I feel like from the beginning, it was just like God kept opening these doors for us. And we were like, okay, we're just going to keep walking through the doors until we feel like God has closed them. And so that meeting happened in January, which, by the way, now that I worked for that agency. I started working for them when my girls were a year. And now I found out like they only do those meetings maybe 2 or 3 times a year. So the fact that that was like it was just all God's timing. And so that meeting was in January. We started the application process, which is very daunting. You have to do like CPR class. You have to do an autobiography. That's like 10 pages of questions. You have to go get a physical. You have to do online adoption classes. We had to go in person to 2 different meetings in Charlotte that were like whole day long trainings. I mean, you have to give them every single financial document that you've ever had. So there's a lot that goes into it. So we did that. And then we entered into the home study portion of our application process in May, and then became a waiting family at, I think it was the end of June. So at that point, you do your profile book. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but every family that you have, they basically put their lives in a photo book. So we did it through Shutterfly, and it's definitely stressful because, you're trying to fit your whole life into one book that these expectant moms are going to look at and decide. So no pressure. But I remember the agency talking to us when I was like kind of stressed about it. And they were like, just be yourself. The expectant mom who is meant to pick you will pick you. It's not like some might look at the same picture and go, oh, I love a dog. Like I had a dog growing up and that's the same kind. I want to pick this family. And another one might look at that and go, oh, I don't like dogs. I don't want my child to live in a family with a dog. So again, it was trusting God that like, okay, we are going to put the right pictures. You're going to say the right things, that it would speak to the right woman. And so we did our book, we had our final meeting, and like I said, became a waiting family in June, and then we just waited. And so, I think the beginning was fine. Like we were just kind of focused on working on the nursery and getting things ready, and tried to stay busy and all of that. And then after a couple months went by, it started to get a little bit like, okay, we haven't heard anything. Are we going to be chosen? And so then it was actually, I can remember the day very well. I was at work and my husband we were both at work, and he texted me and he said, did you see the text message from our caseworker? And I was like, no, what is it? So I checked real quick, and she had messaged both of us and said, I'm with a birth mom. Do you guys have a minute for a phone call? And I'm like, immediately sweating, like freaking out. And so I ran to the closest conference room and we gave her a call, and she was with a birth mom, and she goes, okay, she has something that she'd like to ask you. And I mean, my heart is even beating right now fast, just thinking back to that day. And she said, what do you guys think about twin girls? And my heart just stopped. I mean, when we were going through the home study process, our caseworker had said, are you guys open to multiples? And my husband and I were like, yeah. And I've always thought it'd be awesome to have twins. And so I said to him, like, does that happen very often? And he goes, well, I've been doing this for 20 years and I've seen 2 cases of twins. So, okay, probably not going to happen, but, And so, after kind of getting over like the awe and like, we were seriously speechless, so you're like, I mean, that would be amazing. And here I am thinking, like, they told us most of the time they'll match you with a birth mom who's like 7 or 8 months pregnant. And then maybe you'll go to the appointments with them and you'll have a little time to prepare. And the next thing she said was, they're 3 weeks old and they are getting discharged tomorrow. And we were like, we have 1 crib, we have 1 car seat, like, oh my goodness. And so, we wrapped up the conversation, and I was a manager at my work. And so I had to tell my whole team, like, I might be going on maternity leave tomorrow. And so, we left after, hugging and crying and, celebrating. And I think it was like 3 o'clock when I left work. Um, and so we had to meet at 6 at the hospital. And so, we get to the hospital and we meet with our caseworkers from the agency. And, again, just like it felt surreal. Like the whole thing felt just so crazy. Like I feel like I can still remember so vividly in detail, like that whole experience, like every minute of that time frame. Um, and so then we're waiting, and I just remember our adoption caseworker kept saying, you're never going to believe this mom is beautiful and she's so brave. She just kept saying she's so beautiful and she's so brave. And so we got to meet the birth mom and got to talk with her a little bit. And then a few minutes after we were done, we got to walk over and meet the twin girls. And at this point, there was some hesitation as to whether or not the adoption was going to go through. So going into it, we wanted to open our hearts up to them, but at the same time, like I still felt a little guarded because at that point I knew like we weren't for sure that we were going to bring these girls home with us. And so we got to meet them and we fed them and we burped them and got to talk with their birth mom. And again, it was totally surreal. And like, I remember still, like, there were 2 of them. So how do you even like split your attention with them of like, I just wanted to like hold them both. And so anyways, after a few hours, we got kicked out. And so the next morning my husband and I woke up and we're like, okay, what do we do now? Like we told our work team that we were probably going to be not coming back for a few weeks. And now what do we do? And so again, it was back into that whole mentality of the waiting game. And so we had to wait a week before the decision had been made. And so, and the day, I guess to go back a little bit, the day we got the phone call was actually my sister and my dad's birthday. And so that was pretty cool. And then 8 days later was my brother's birthday. And that was the day they called us and said, okay, they're your girls. And so we got to go pick them up. And again, this whole process feels like it took forever, but also happened so quickly at the same time. And so I remember we went and we picked them up, and they at that time they were 4 weeks old, and basically they came to us with an outfit on their back, a blanket, and a plastic bag with like some bottles and formula. And there was no, this is the last time they ate, and this is how much they eat, and this is what you do. Like it was a crazy experience. But I remember our daughter's birth mom and we had to like go into the kitchen of the pregnancy center and figure out how to make a bottle together and feed them and change them. And we signed the paperwork and brought them home. And again, it was like the most surreal experience, like driving these 2 little babies home with us. So yeah, it was, a crazy experience, the whole thing. Yeah. So
it's it's just so awesome to hear your story. And I'm glad, we chatted earlier this week because it's like, I don't know, it just makes me misty eyed just hearing the story because it's just an awesome story. I'm not sure, because since we had chatted a little bit, I'm not sure if you mentioned what led you guys up to adoption, like what caused you to make the decision to adopt. I can't remember if you shared that earlier with me or if you shared it here.
Yeah. Well, so I think it was something that we always kind of felt like that was God's leading for us. We, had friends who had adopted before and growing up, and just, the call that God has for us and James 127 to care for the orphan. But then I think what led us to do it when we did it was our journey through infertility. And so I think that's something, for us that kind of was the instigating factor of, okay,
Yeah.
do we want to go down the route of fertility treatments, where the unknown is like you could spend all this time and heartache and money and end up without a child at the end, or you could walk down the path of adoption and give a home to a child who needs one and know that you're gonna have a child at the end. So that was kind of the reason,
Yes.
amongst others, that we chose to pursue adoption at the time that we did.
Yes. So again, wonderful story. Again, so glad that you're taking the time today to share with us. If you just tuned in, or if you're watching, or you're just tuning in, today or this month is National Adoption Month. And so we have our guest, Lauren Hyatt, here sharing her story and her journey on adoption. And we're getting ready to move into a few tips for those considering adoption. So, Lauren, if you want to go ahead and share your first tip or point.
Yeah. So I think it's easy for us, especially as Christians, to look at what God says in James 1:27 to care for the orphan and the widow, and maybe feel like an obligation or feel like it's something that you should do. Or maybe you have, really good intentions of wanting to rescue a child, or I don't know. But I think when I think about advice for those considering adoption, I would say the biggest one is to evaluate your motives. Like, why are you wanting to adopt? And this was something that actually was really surprising to me as we were going through the process of thinking of adoption. Like I said, we went through a lot of training and we went to informational sessions, and I feel like it was like a really good heart check for us, because I do think that initially when we were going through the first thought process of wanting to adopt, I do feel like maybe we didn't have the right intentions. And I think we did have the idea that we wanted to rescue a child and that there were children who needed rescuing. And I didn't understand that wasn't the right mentality. Like, it seems very noble and it seems like the right thing. But after kind of processing through what it looks like and what a healthy adoption looks like, at the end of the day, like, your intentions need to be that you want to grow your family and you want to bring another child into your home. Because, if you are wanting to rescue a child, but you're not prepared to actually have a child in your home, or maybe your home isn't the place where you need to add another child to the mix at that moment, like, there's still if you bring home a baby, they're still going to cry in the middle of the night. And you have to know that the choice that you made is going to be able to, it's not just because you wanted to rescue a child, it's that you wanted to be a parent, like you wanted to be a mom or a dad to another child. And so I think for looking at the long-term healthiness or the health of the adoption, you shouldn't go in with the expectation that you're saving the child, because I think it can really easily turn into a savior complex of oh, well, they owe it to me to love me, or they owe it to me to be because I saved them. And I think what I have learned more than anything is people say all the time to us, oh, your girls are so lucky to have you. And it actually bothers me, because I'm actually, we're the lucky ones. We are the ones who had infertility. We were the ones that wanted to be parents. They lost their first mom. That's not lucky for them. That's hard and that's tragic. And so I think the people who go into it wanting to rescue a child, I think the natural response they think their child should have would be to be grateful. But what I've learned is, with how much tragedy and heartbreak there is in the complexity of adoption, if you have that mentality going into adoption, it's probably not going to long-term be healthy for your adoption. So I think, again, if you have that idea and that's the reason you wanted to adopt to start with, that's totally okay. It's a okay place to start. I think it's just you have to be able to move on from there. You have to be able to recognize like both the hard part and the amazing part of adoption. And it's not just all going to be, yay, you rescued a child and, here's your pat on the back. Like there are other ways if you would like to help with the orphan and the widow, to be able to do that without adopting a child yourself. And so I think that's for me, one of the things I'm passionate about is like, and I actually wrote a blog post for Arrow and Root about this, but it's 5 reasons you shouldn't adopt, and just going through like really being honest with yourself and trying to figure out where is your heart right now, and then like taking the steps towards getting to the place where, okay, we want to grow our family and we want to add another child to our family, and we want to do it through adoption. So
I absolutely love that. It's so insightful. I know for me, and as well as those who are watching or will watch, it's just so insightful because, evaluate your motives. I love this first tip. The part about not wanting to rescue a child versus growing your family. It's so big because, the first, I'm just thinking about my own thought,
yeah.
You know what I mean? And I'm like, wow, yeah. I don't want to say it's the first thought, but it kind of is. And so anyways, it's really thought provoking to be the first thing. So evaluating your motives when it comes to this. So we'll move into your second point.
Yeah. So I think once you get through that process of, okay, you feel like you're in a good place about why you want to adopt, you're on the same page as your spouse about wanting to adopt. Because I think that's the other thing is like, I think there's typically in a couple relationship, like one who maybe feels a little bit stronger and is kind of the one like leading the charge, but you also have to make sure like your spouse is on the same page, because if you're not, I feel like you need to get there before you start down the next path, which is, my next point is that you need to find an ethical adoption agency to work with. And so I think, like I said before, it's super overwhelming, especially if you don't have personal experience with knowing somebody who adopted or knowing someone who works for an adoption agency. To just go online and literally Google it, you can find, hundreds of agencies that you could use. And so I remember talking with a friend who adopted, and she gave me this list of questions, and it was like 2 pages long of like all the things that you should ask your agency. And I'm like, I don't even understand why this is important. Like, what am I doing? Why am I asking this? Like, do I really need to like call all these agencies and ask them these questions? And so I think obviously if you know somebody who has worked with an agency, like, and they trust them and they had a great experience, like try your very best to have like a personal experience and like a reference of somebody. And I will just shout it out for the agency I work for is Christian Adoption Services. I would say without a doubt, 100% they are a God-honoring ethical agency. So anyone looking, I know there is a wait list for adoptive families that are interested in working with them. So if you are interested, and I'm always happy to help and answer any questions anyone might have. And you can also follow along with my journey on notourhome.com and follow me on Instagram. I think we'll talk about that later. But again, I'm always happy to help like people who are in this journey of trying to figure out what agency they want to work with. But I think, people, and I was the same way, like, what is an ethical agency? Like, what are the differences, and how do you separate one from another, and why are some more expensive, and why do some have longer waits, and all of these things? Because I think obviously in your mind initially you're like, okay, I want an agency where it's the shortest wait time and it's the cheapest one. But that's not always the best. And I'm now part of these groups on Facebook where it's like, people, adoption groups where people talk about like their experiences. And I would say there's 2 things to watch out for when you're looking into trying to start the adoption process. I think the first thing I wanted to touch on is this idea of self-matching. And so you may have seen this where people basically create like a Facebook or an Instagram or even a website of their family, and it talks, shows pictures, and it talks about who they are. And the goal is to then basically match with an expectant mom and go this like private route with maybe just a lawyer. And the idea is that maybe it's cheaper to do that. And there are so many things in my mind that are wrong with that, because you don't have somebody walking through every step of the way and like telling you what's legal and telling you what's right and what's healthy, and educating both the adoptive family and the expectant mom, and providing resources for her. And I just feel like a lot of the conversations that should be had by the adoption agency, it shouldn't be, the adoptive family and the expectant mom talking about living expenses and like all of these very tender topics. Because I just don't think it sets the right, like the foundation for a healthy relationship moving forward. And obviously this is too where like you talk about adoption scams, where there's people, I mean, it's sad to say, but there are people, women who will pretend they're pregnant to try to get money out of people. And most of the time where you see those things happening in, adoptive families or hopeful adoptive families are out thousands of dollars. And a lot of times it's with the self-matching method. And so again, I would definitely, recommend someone looking for an actual agency, not just a lawyer, but someone who's going to walk through the process with you. And kind of on that note, there are so many agencies out there and so many great agencies. Obviously, Christian Adoption Services is not the only amazing agency, but I would just say that when you're talking to an agency, just kind of listen to your gut and listen to how they talk about the women that they work with. I think one example that, again, I didn't realize this until like many months into our process of just the way that they talk about women when they're pregnant. So technically, they talk about women as birth moms, like once they place. But I think one of the things that I've learned is when a woman is pregnant, before she's given birth or signed the papers, she should be called an expectant mom, because she has not signed any papers. The baby is still hers. It's in her belly. So for an agency to talk about someone who is pregnant as a birth mom is very presumptuous of them. And so it's actually like a very small way of like coercion, because like if you're already talking about her as a birth mom, you have already made the decision that this person is going to place their child for adoption. And they have, in North Carolina, they actually have up until 7 days after placement to change their mind. And so until she has signed the papers and the revocation period is over, she should be considered an expectant mom, So yeah. I think that's one small thing. But also just thinking about like, how do they focus on education? Like, what does the training look like for the adoptive families? What resources do they provide them? What do they offer for the birth moms who do place with them? Do they have, post care? Like, how do they give them counseling? It is definitely a very complex, and I mean, there is definitely grief that is associated for women who choose to place their children for adoption. And I think having an agency who recognizes that and sees that and addresses that is so important. And so again, one of the things that we really liked about our agency is they every single year they put on what's called a birth mothers retreat, and they invite all the women who have ever placed with their agency to come and basically be pampered and be loved on, and for them to just share Jesus's love with them for that weekend. And so they take them out to eat, and they bring speakers in, and it's also a time for them to process through their grief that they have, because it is a unique grief. Like, there are not very many people who can share that experience with them. And so, I mean, some of these women have never even told anybody that they have placed their child for adoption, that they're a birth mom. And so being able to share their stories, and, this past birth mothers retreat, they actually had a woman who had never shared her story with any of her family members. No one ever knew she was pregnant. And after going to the birth moms retreat, she went and she shared with her family that she had a child and placed them for adoption, and the freedom that she felt in sharing that. And, I feel like that's one of those things where it's like truth is freedom. Like
Yeah.
Satan can use what we think of as secrets as bondage. And so being able to help those, like the women who have dealt with such a big grief, piece, to be able to share that and to kind of release that, I think. Anyways, so I think all that to be said, looking for an agency that honors and respects and uses verbiage that honors and respects their birth moms that they work with is so, so important. So that's, I mean, being able to maybe talk to somebody who's worked with them in the past, or, talking with them and asking them questions is probably the best way to find one.
Yes. So I just wanted to so another thing that we had kind of talked about a little bit when we were talking about making sure to find an ethical adoption agency was when people ask, like, why is adoption so expensive?
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit about that? Because it's not like you're paying for a child.
Right.
Explain that for us.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think we had the same question when we started the process, like, why is it so expensive? Like, it just seems like it should be more accessible for people. And so I think through the process of adopting, and also now being on the other side of it and working for an adoption agency, like, I can tell you for one thing, there is a lot of penny pitching that happens on the adoption agency side. Like, there have been many months where they said, you can't work more than this many hours because we just literally don't have the money for it. And, in so many ways, we just try to do what we can. So not all agencies are over here like rolling in the money, because even though adoptions are expensive, it's not because the adoption agency or the, birth moms are getting paid a lot. There's services that they are providing. And so I think when you look at it, I think a sign of an ethical agency is that there are just as many women who they work with, they support, they take out for lunch, they talk to, that don't end up placing with their agency as the women that do. Because when you think about it in your mind, you're like, oh, well, of course, yeah, I can understand paying for meals and maybe some living expenses and transportation to and from doctor's appointments for the women that place. But there's also a huge portion of women who are going to work with the agency and maybe at the last minute decide this isn't right for me. And you want an agency that's going to be looking out for, I mean, first and foremost, what is the best interest of the child? And second, what is in the best interest of the birth mom? Like, and then lastly, what is in the best interest of the adoptive family? And so I think that was something that I really didn't understand about, like, the cost side of things, is that the adoption agency spends money on all of these women, supporting these women to figure out what is in the best interest for them. And that's really their focus. And so, like, there's that aspect, but then there's also obviously like the lawyers and all of the counseling and the birth mothers retreat and the education piece for families. And so there's just so much that goes into it that I did not understand. And so I think that's something, again, to be aware of, like, is some agencies they say, oh, okay, well, this birth mom has $7,000 of living expenses they're asking for. And, I'm definitely not against agencies paying for living expenses. I think, there's, in the adoption community, there are two sides of that. Some people are very for it, others are against it, in terms of looking at it as buying a baby. But I think there's definitely, a line where it is, women need to be supported. They need to be able to, live and pay for medical expenses. But there's also some agencies where their draw is for women to come place with them is that they pay them so much money toward living expenses that sometimes it can then end up feeling like coercion. Like, well, they paid me so much money. Now I need to place my child for adoption, even if they might be having second second thoughts. So just being aware again, kind of to that point of finding an ethical agency, like there's a fine line of, what is maybe buying a baby, and just kind of thinking through what feels comfortable for you and what feels right in your gut. I feel like a lot of it in this process is listening to your gut, and prayerfully considering like what agency you're going to go through, and what situations you want to be presented on. So
Yes, I wanted to get that in there because I knew that's a question that I know
for
people are asking. And I love how we're going to go to the final point in a minute, but I just love how, like you mentioned, prayerfully consider, you know, pray about your motives, and
Mhm.
just how you felt God was with you guys through your entire journey so far. Because I really think that is really important here too, as well, right?
Oh,
Just keeping God center in prayer and in throughout the whole process. I wanted to add that in there. And so for your final point, what is your final point with this?
yeah. And I think that actually is a really great lead in, because my last point is to have an open mind and to trust the process. And I think a lot of that is trusting in God and trusting that He has um, your best intentions in mind, and that
Mhm.
He has it all figured out. And I think it's easy to say, like looking back and going, oh, well, that makes sense. Hindsight's 2020. But just truly having faith that, every time that you're like, okay, it's been 3 months and we haven't heard anything. Like, are they even showing my book? Like, what is going on? Like, why is this taking longer than I expected? Knowing that it's like God already has your child in mind. And I think for me, looking back, I wouldn't say that I like fully trusted that. I think it was like I still wanted to gain, like, just hold on a little bit to that. Like, I would get frustrated with my husband when he was taking too long to write his autobiography, because I'm like, come on, like, let's get the ball rolling. And he would be like, always talk about it as throwing the anchor. And I'm like, because I'm like someone like, okay, once we decide we're going to do something, let's move forward. And he would be like, okay, let's just take a step back and like we'll get it done. Um, and it's just crazy to like look back and go, okay, if we would have, finished our home study a little bit earlier, or if any one thing had been different in our daughter's birth mom story, like one tiny little detail, and we would not be our daughter's parents. And like, it's, like I said, it's so much easier to look back and say, I get it and I see it. And, but just in the moment, remembering, like, I think for me, I would have been fine with any baby because I wanted to be a mom. Like, it didn't matter to me, like which expectant mom was going to pick our family. I just wanted to be picked. But God has his plan for us is so much better. And like, I thought, okay, I would be fine with like a boy or a girl or whatever. Now I'm a mom to twin girls, and like, I could not imagine anything better, or like, it just is so perfect for our family. And like, I mean, it's just down to like the littlest things, but like my girls, it's funny because our girl's birth mom kind of looks like me. She has dark hair, dark eyes. And she even said, like, you know, she has another biological daughter. Our girls have a sister, and she looks just like my husband. It's
Oh my gosh.
like, I have pictures of him holding her, and like, they totally look like each other. But it's funny because our girls came out and they have blonde hair and blue eyes. And it's like, what? But they have curls, and I straighten and curl my hair, but I have naturally curly hair. And so it's just so fun. Or like, they have little bumps on their arms, just like I do. And so just like little things like that. And, again, going back to like the photo album piece, and I was so nervous about what to put in there, but I had a page about how much we love the outdoors. And my husband is obsessed with bass fishing. And like, that is his like main hobby in life. If he could be a professional bass fisherman, he would. And so she saw that page, and like, that was one of the reasons she picked us, was because she used to go fishing with her dad when she was little. And so she loved the idea that the girls would get to experience that. And so I think that was just another reminder of being true to who we are in our book, also sets our relationship with her up for success, because now it's not like we put stuff in our book that's not real. Like, okay, they literally got a fishing pole before they were ever even like a year old. They have lifetime fishing and hunting license from their grandpa, because it's so like, that's such a innate part of our family. And so I think that just all those little pieces about how God has worked in connecting my husband and I with not only that, like Camden and McKinley, but also we now have this whole other family that, you know, like just a couple weeks ago, we went to the pumpkin patch with them and went to lunch with them. And my girls, they know them. And so like kind of piecing it back to like my advice is having an open mind and trusting the process, like having an open mind too about the idea of open adoption is so important, because I think for me, I was a little bit afraid about what the idea of open adoption looked like, because like the idea of sharing my child with somebody or
Can you explain that real quick? Real briefly, just in case if someone doesn't know what that is.
Yeah. So back in the day, like pretty much they only did closed adoptions where, you know, a woman would place her child for adoption, and then the adoptive family, they would go their separate ways. And I mean, there was a lot of people who didn't even tell their child that they were adopted ever, or they would tell them till they were much older. And I think there was a lot of shame that happened for adoptees in that. And so what we've learned, as now there's a lot more adult adoptees that can talk through what that experience was like, we've realized how beneficial open adoption can be. And so open adoption can look, I mean, there's a huge spectrum of, there's closed adoption, semi-open, and open adoption. But even within open adoption, I mean, some people invite their child's birth parents over to their home for dinner. Some invite them to birthday parties and have each other's numbers, and they text all the time. And then there's other situations where maybe they have like a scheduled FaceTime call like once a year, or they send them an email with updates. So it really can look very different. And typically they recommend, again, this is where having an agency is so important, because like before our daughter's birth mom even signed the papers, we talked about what would an open adoption look like. And you know, she was the one that was able to say like, well, this is what I was thinking, this is like what I was hoping for, maybe we could, you know, text every once in a while, and you could send me pictures, and maybe we would get together like twice a year or something. And we were like, that sounds great. And so we were able to, you know, set that groundwork before the adoption ever happened. And I think, you know, again, as Christians, it's our obligation to now fulfill our end of that. Because she's kind of in charge of like making those decisions before the placement. But now, you know, there's technically nothing in writing that says like we have to go see her, or we have to, but for us, it's so important for us to be able to honor her and be able to, I don't know, I think a lot of times about wanting to make her proud of the way that we're parenting, and wanting to get her to see like the girls growing up, and, you know, sending her a picture of the girls on their first day of preschool or their Halloween costumes. And so that has been such a blessing to us. And then even expanding into like having that extended family of hers, a lot of things in our story, I didn't think that that was going to be possible. But over time, our girls are now 3. We now have a relationship with, you know, our girls' birth grandmother and cousins. And it's been so cool to be able to see that. And so I think for us, it's something that, you know, we have learned, and I'm so thankful for, again, education before we started the process is, you know, they say you should start telling your kids their story from the time you bring them home. Like, I mean, they're 1 month old and you're supposed to be sharing their story with them. And so my husband and I listened to that advice. And honestly, I think it's more for us as parents to like be able to practice it and get the wording right, because adoption is complex. Like, there's language, like language is important, and we're still going to mess up. Like, I don't have it all together. I don't have it all figured out, but being able to kind of talk through with them, sharing age appropriate details of what their story is, and just making it part of everyday life. And I think that's something I'm so thankful that we were told, because I don't ever want them to remember a time where they were told that they were adopted. Like, my girls just know it. And it's cool because like the other day I was talking to my one daughter and she looked at me and she's like, come sit with me, mommy. And I was like, okay. She goes, let's talk. And I said,
Mhm.
what do you want to talk about, McKinley? And she goes, let's talk about how you and daddy adopted me. And I mean, like my heart could have just cracked in two because I was like, you know, the fact that she feels like we can just talk about it and it's not like this big scary thing. Like I want her and her sister to always know that they can come to us and talk about it and like that we can be open with them. And again, I don't have all the answers of why it happened or all the details, but I'm so thankful that they have this relationship with their birth mom where she can say like, this is what happened and this is why. And I love you so much. And I can say with certainty that I know she did it because she loved them so much. Um, and just being able for them to know where they came from. Like, you know, we talk about, oh, mommy has brown eyes and you have blue eyes. Well, where do you get your blue eyes from? My birth father. My birth father has blue eyes. And, you know, just being able to have that connection of being able to find their identity, knowing where they came from. I think a lot of adoptees struggle with their identity of being able to connect like their biology with their biography, like where they
Right.
came from with where they are now. And I just always want my girls to be able to be strong in who they are and not have questions about where they came from or, you know, what their story is, because I want them to be able to find their identity in Christ and not in
Mhm.
these questions that they have of where did I come from? And, you know, why do I have these quirks and why is it this way? And so I think just having that openness to always let your child feel comfortable to come and talk to you, and also obviously talking about their birth family in a positive way and
Mhm.
with respect always, because adoption stories are hard. Like most of the time, the reason that a child is placed for adoption is not an easy thing to talk about. It's not rainbows and butterflies. It's
Right.
hard. And so I think being able to have um, respect and honor for their birth parents, but also being able to talk with them honestly. You know, and they say like your child should know their full adoption story, I think by the time they're cognitively 8 years old. And
Mhm.
so to think about that, like that's a lot for an 8-year-old to know all the details of their story. But in order for them to feel like there wasn't ever something that their parents
Mhm.
didn't share with them or withheld information from them. And so being able to incorporate little pieces of their story as time goes on and make it just a part of life is just living with an open concept of the
Mhm.
topic of adoption.
I love that so much. For one, again, your story just keeps getting better. It's just a beautiful story to be able to, like you said, for have an open mind to open versus closed adoption. So now you have, um, you're able to incorporate the birth mom into the family and as well as her family. So it's like, just more people to love on them. And so
Yeah.
I just absolutely love that. And so you share so much wonderful information with us. I'm so excited to share because when I saw your story, because I think it was National Adoption Day, and you
Yeah.
shared a beautiful, beautiful picture of your twin girls on Instagram, and I saw it and I was like, oh my gosh, I knew right then I wanted you to come on to share with us. And then I found out that it was actually National Adoption Month, and I was like, yes, this is so perfect. And
Yes.
your story is just so amazing. It's just so awesome. And the things that you shared today, evaluating your motives, finding an ethical adoption agency, and then keeping an open mind and trusting the process. These are just also great. And so now I wanted to see if anyone had a question for Lauren. And so we'll be taking questions. And I just wanted to remind you that, this is recorded. And so you can come back and look at it. Or if you have a question, you can actually drop your question still in the comment section. And I'll be looking back at this throughout the weekend, the remainder of the week, whether it's Friday now. Oh, through the weekend as well. And if you have any questions, then I can just pass those along to Lauren. And then also she's shared with us, and she'll share again where we can find her at, where you can find and keep up with her and her story, or just to reach out to because she does have connections and just a wealth of knowledge and resources, and she actually works at a replicable adoption agency. So share with us how we can find you and keep up with you.
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram and Facebook on Not Our Home. It's not _our_home. And I think you can probably tag me in it, but and then you can go to www.notourhome.com, and I should have a blog post up hopefully later today that's actually on this topic. So there'll be a little bit more in there of a couple other questions and some other pieces of advice and stuff. So would love for you guys to check that out this weekend. And I'm so thankful to be on this interview, and I'm so glad that God put us in each other's lives, and our paths crossed such a perfect timing. So
it's so true. Same here. Same here. So you guys, that is it for today. I'm so glad again that you have joined us. And until next time, be blessed, you guys. Okay. Take care. Bye.
bye.